to the Edward R. Roybal Public Works hearing room. We are joined by the Honorable Councilor Jose Rizar. I believe Councilor Weiss won't be with us this afternoon, but we will push forward. Just a few items for your consideration. When you come to the microphone, please speak into the mic. As you can tell, it's hard to hear. The acoustics are terrible. When you do come to the microphone, give us your name and address. Some of you have written very eloquent letters for the committee, but given that there's 2 minutes, if you can get to the point or the emphasis of your message from your letter sooner than later, because sometimes you run out of time and you're desperately looking at your last paragraph and you didn't make the point you wanted to make. So I just highly recommend you keep your eye on the clock. If the person has already made the point you wanted to make, it's okay to come up and just say, I agree with the previous speaker, and that way we can get this committee moving as quick as possible. That being said, we do have one item that does not have speaker cards. That's item number 1. Can you read that to the record, Roberto?
Yes, Councilman. Item 1 is a motion. Perry Reyes is requesting that the council, in conformance with the administrative code, to initiate the consideration of 52nd Place and 27th Street as historic cultural monuments. Great.
And with Councilman Rizar's approval, we can move this, adopt and move it forward to the council.
So moved.
Thank you, sir. Okay, item number 2.
Yes, Councilman, this is a city attorney report. It's requesting...
I'm sorry, Roberto, time out. Let's do this. Gail's here with us, and I don't want to keep her too much longer. I know she has a busy schedule, so I appreciate your patience. But I know you're here for the report, and we can just give you that time, so that'll be the last item on the agenda. We can move it up.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reyes. I wanted to report to you and to members of the audience today that the Planning Department has been quite busy over the past couple of weeks with public meetings on both transit-oriented development and on community plans. Over the past week and a half, there have been 4 community meetings regarding the Boyle Heights community plans. And integrated into those meetings are also the transit-oriented development workshops for the Gold Line extension stations. They have been very well attended. We've had a lot of participation. Council Member Huizar attended one of them to welcome everyone. His staff has been at all of the meetings, so they have been really terrific. We've gotten a lot of input from the community and on both the planning and on the process, and we're working hard to improve with each of our meetings. We also held 2 community meetings last week on the transit-oriented development plans for the Expo line, both the Western and the Vermont stations, and we had pretty good turnout for both of those, and we are also looking at ways to improve and get more people to come out for those. Those are being conducted not just by city staff, but also by consultants who are working with us on the community outreach. So we've been very busy, and a lot of community members have participated.
Great. Any comments, observations, Councilmember?
Sure. I'd just like to commend you and your staff, Ms. Goldberg, for the wonderful work you're doing in the community plan for Boyle Heights. The one I attended was well attended, which showed that there was some great outreach done, and the visuals and the communication between the staff and the community on the one-on-ones and also the group ones is the type of dialogue we need to make sure we have as much input and that community residents take ownership of this community plan, which was my message that day, which is this is their community plan. The more they participate, the more they get involved. The end result will be a visualization of the community they want to see. So your staff has been doing a tremendous job, both from the process-wise and in terms of explaining to the residents and residents who are mostly at these meetings Spanish-speaking residents that the cultural understanding and being able to translate the technical jargon we often use to ways that these residents could understand. You're doing a great job in doing that. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, one of the things we're very proud of is that almost all of the planners who are working in those communities are Spanish speaking. And so at every station, I think with very few exceptions, the planners there were able to communicate with the community members in the language that the community members were most comfortable communicating in. We also tried to be as responsive as we possibly could, and at the first meeting, when community members asked us to have more of the boards in Spanish, in the next 3 days before the next workshop, we actually converted all of the boards so that they were all in Spanish. So we're trying really hard to also build long-term relationships in the community so that we can have more participation and so that we can really produce plans that are owned by the community. So that's also a secondary but perhaps primary motivation for the work that we're doing. So we appreciate your acknowledgement of that. Thanks.
And as you're speaking, I'm having flashbacks to the goal line meetings we had and establishing transit-oriented districts, and it must have been at least 7 years of work that when it all finally came together. And my only regret is that we did not, because of budgetary reasons, include the type of park and ride facilities that allow for the level of mitigation, given that many who travel from regional distances will stop at these stations and jump on the train and get into downtown, which is ideal. But when you don't have the parking facilities with all the necessary security systems, it becomes a hardship, and we're going through that in parts of Highland Park. And so I'm hoping that eventually, through this study that was introduced to the council, I believe last week, we had some transportation analysts discussing the priorities of the city, and I've raised the point about circulators and how we get to the local needs so that they don't have to worry about getting into the car. I believe Councilman Rizar in that meeting expanded on that concept as well. But that's a request we've been having ever since we had our cutbacks on the budget of the goal line.
Right.
And that's a missing link, I believe, to the very dense areas, because it's not only people density, but it's also income density. And we should capture those dollars to stay in our areas with mixed uses and all that good stuff. But it's just something I want to make sure that stays in the radar in this discussion.
Well, I hope you'll be happy to hear that the folks who did the presentation at Council last week from the RAND Corporation have presented all of that information to the planners who are working in those areas and around the transit-oriented stations. So the RAND report has been widely circulated in the planning department, and we have sat down with the consultants to try to better understand how some of the findings from that report can inform the work that we're doing so that we can be a little more comprehensive and deal with those issues.
Yeah, to not include the land use element to the transportation discussion would be a huge mistake.
Right.
So I appreciate that. So thank you so much for your hard work and your patience. And now we can move on to item number 2.
Yes, Councilman, this is a city attorney report. It's requesting discussion and direction relative to establishing procedures for CEQA appeals to the council.
Okay, can we have report from our staff, city attorney?
Yes, hi, Susan Fan, Assistant City Attorney. Again, we're here because our ordinance has submitted a proposed ordinance that will establish an appeal process for CEQA appeals. And because there are a number of issues involved and some drafting problems that we encountered, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to kind of go through the ordinance, explain what it does, and highlight for you some of the issues that we encountered in drafting it, and then seek your direction on how you want to proceed.
This will be the highlights, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Initially, the ordinance is here because CEQA, the state law, requires us to, requires the city to allow appeals of environmental determinations, either to certify an EIR, to adopt a mitigated negative declaration, or a determination that a particular project is exempt from CEQA. And so this requirement has been in effect for a while, and we have conducted some of these appeals, which actually some of them have gone through your committee here, but we didn't have a process for them. And we thought it would be helpful if we had a process that laid out exactly how you would handle these, and so that's what we're hoping the ordinance would establish. Yes.
In regards to the timing, what prompted this? We've been conducting ourselves as a city without this requirement or this proposed structure.
Right.
Why now, and how long has it been since we should have had it in place?
It's the state law has been around for a couple of years. I know there have been some appeals that have come through the planning department, and I think at least the only other one that I'm aware of that's come through to council emanated from the Department of Public Works. Okay. And most of the actions that are subject to CEQA already go to the city council one way or the other. There's an appeal of a conditional use permit, for instance, ordinances that have CEQA clearances, they automatically have to go up to city council. So this ordinance here would sort of fill the gap when there's no other route to get an environmental determination to council. So it would only apply in the situations where there's no other appeal route to council. Okay. So that would limit its scope somewhat as to when it would apply. One of the problems that we ran into is that our charter sets out procedures for certain types of decisions that the city makes, and in some instances the charter says you can only have a certain number of appeals. In other instances the charter says you can only appeal to a certain body, and in a third set of instances the final decision-making power is given to a body within the city other than city council. Like, for instance, the proprietary boards have final decision-making power over some types of decisions. So because our charter said not everything goes to city council, and because state law says that environmental determinations need to go to city council, in drafting this ordinance, we sort of separated the approval itself from the environmental determination because we didn't want to interfere with our charter any more than the state law required. So this appeal process would only apply to the environmental determination, not to the actual approval of the permit or other decision that the underlying body would make. So in terms of how it's been set up, it can be brought the way the ordinance is drafted. An appeal can be filed by any person who has already filed an objection to the project below. So in other words, city council would not be hearing appeals if the underlying approval, no one came and complained about it. So you would have to sort of exhaust that administrative remedy by complaining in front of the board, and in that case then you could file the appeal. What types of decisions would it cover? The way the state law is written, it's fairly broad. It would cover decisions involving EIRs, mitigated negative declarations, and arguably it could also cover situations where normally there is no CEQA because it's exempt from CEQA. There's an issue about the way the ordinance is drafted. It's written to apply to publicly made decisions. And so that's a decision your committee could give us directions on. Some things are not made at public hearings where you have Brown Act notice that people know about the decision, but they still would require a CEQA clearance, or they might be exempt from CEQA. And so we'd have to figure out how we would provide the appeals for those. But in terms of the way it's set up right now, it's been written so that within 10 days of the decision by the city, the environmental determination, the appeal would have to be filed within 10 days. It would have to specify the grounds that are being raised in the appeal. And right now it's limited, so the appellant could only raise grounds that were already raised below. So you're not hearing new arguments in front of the city council that the underlying body didn't have the opportunity to decide. It's set so that the city council would need to make a decision within 60 days of when the appeal is filed. And the question arises there, what happens if they don't do that? We believe that under CEQA and case law, that the matter would have to remain pending in front of council. It would actually have to make a decision. We couldn't, for instance, receive and file things. If council couldn't reach a decision on the matter, they would have to keep trying until they did. There'd be no, although there's a time limit within which council would have to act, if council didn't meet that time limit, there'd be no penalty or no result. So it wouldn't be, if you don't act within the 60 days, then the appeal's denied. We think that we have that for some of our current appeal procedures. We don't think that would be permissible under CEQA. So they're time deadlines, but they're not sort of sudden death time deadlines.
So if the council does not act in 60 days, what happens?
Well, the only penalty that really could occur would be someone would be able to go to court and say the CEQA ordinance requires an action within 60 days. The city council hasn't acted within 60 days, so court, please order the city council to take an action.
Do their job.
Yeah, to do their job. But it wouldn't result in the appeal either being deemed denied, or deemed approved.
Okay.
We don't think that we can legally write it that way. It would require action by an affirmative vote, and there's a particular case that we believe stands for that provision, the Vedanta case. So if city council got stuck and couldn't decide which way they wanted to vote on something, or they couldn't receive a majority, you couldn't just receive and file it. You would have to keep trying to actually take an affirmative vote up or down on the appeal. The way we've written it, it calls for a majority vote as opposed to a larger than majority, but that's a policy decision the council can make. And also, it's written so that the council has three options. When they receive an appeal, they can either affirm the underlying body's environmental determination. If the appellant wants to withdraw the appeal, the council could accept the withdrawal of the appeal, and that would be the end of it. Or the council could set aside the environmental determination and send it back to the underlying body to make a different determination. And those are the three options the ordinance gives. The way it works is once the appeal is filed, the underlying approval is sort of suspended. It's not final yet. It has to wait for the environmental determination to catch up. So if the city council decided that it disagreed with the underlying body's environmental determination, it would set it aside, send it back to the underlying body or board, and then the decision is suspended until that board takes an additional action on the environmental.
Okay.
Some of the effects that you could expect to come from this, it will arguably expand the number of matters that will come in front of city council. Right now, there's certain matters that city council does not hear because either our codes don't provide, or primarily because our codes don't provide for those types of things to come to city council. There are a number of ministerial decisions that the city makes that are exempt from CEQA. An argument could be made that under the state law, if you make if a determination is made that something's exempt from CEQA, in other words, no CEQA clearance is required, people could make an argument that that gets to be appealed to council. There's no case law on that topic, but the state law does talk in terms of a determination that something's not subject to CEQA. The issue has come up whether or not you would have multiple appeals to council. Say the board approves the project with an MND, the MND gets appealed to council, council says, no, we need to have an EIR, that goes back to the board makes some other decision, either a different MND or the EIR. The question is, would that be able to be appealed again to council? Although the ordinance doesn't specifically say so, we would advise that the state law only requires one appeal, not multiple appeals over and over and over around in circles. And we could write the ordinance to make that clear as well. And then the other issue is the implications of having this ordinance on Charter Section 245, which allows city council, upon a larger vote, to make the choice whether or not to take something up to it that it wouldn't normally be able to have. If once we adopt this law, and even actually without this process, there would not be any ability to use Charter Section 245 to take up an environmental determination, because that charter section only applies when there's no other appeal provided by law. Right now, the state law provides the appeal. This ordinance would as well. And so the question is, would the city council lose its charter authority over the underlying approval? We think not. And so there's a potential for projects coming up twice to council, once on the appeal from the environmental determination, and then if the board doesn't do what council wanted it to do with the environmental determination and somehow approve the permit differently, then an argument could be made that that action could be taken up to council by Charter Section 245. And again, these are all issues that we're not sure about. It's not entirely clear how that will operate. We expect they'll kind of work themselves out as we experiment with this and see how it goes. The only other main issue that's been presented by this ordinance is whether or not to have a fee for the filing of an appeal to cover the cost of staff time, because these appeals would best be, they would work best if council had a good record to look at, had reports from the staff explaining what the issues were and what the different positions were. So that's a policy decision, no, it's not a legal decision.
Now, in your explanation in terms of its impacts, and we're going to learn as we go along, as it gets implemented, the role of the Board of Preferred Powers, that board will also be involved in these processes as well, if there's conflict within the different council members, given their roles in the respective committees. Is that
presumably, yes, I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
So if the council wasn't able to hear it because of some sort of conflict, then we go to the Board of Referred Powers.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we included that in there. Any questions, Councilmember? Okay. So we'll move on to public comment at this time, and then we'll take it from there. So I'd like to welcome Veronica Perez-Becker, Clyde Williams, and Sharon Rubalcaba. Ms. Becker, give us your name and address, please.
Good afternoon, council members. Veronica Perez-Becker with the Central City Association. For every project in Los Angeles, thousands of hours are spent preparing, editing, and reviewing environmental documents, such as EIRs and MNDs. It is extremely important for the city to establish clear internal procedures for conducting appeals of environmental determinations by non-elected decision-making bodies. Because so much time and so many resources are spent on this effort, that right to appeal should not be misused in order to delay or stop projects that have legitimately complied with CEQA regulations. Therefore, it is necessary that the City Council act quickly when hearing CEQA appeals, and we encourage the City to adopt a 30-day window for appeals rather than the 60 days that are spelled out in the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Clyde Williams? Mr. Williams, are you here? Okay. Sharon Rubalcaba.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Rubalcaba with the Alston Bird Law Firm. Our address is 333 South Hope Street. I'm here today supporting the amendment of the municipal code to include these appeal procedures for CEQA, and I'm appearing on behalf of Plains All-American Pipeline. Plains is the project proponent for the Pier 400 project in the Port of Los Angeles. And the environmental review process for this particular project has gone on for over 4 years now. We had a notice of preparation that was filed in June of 2004, and we finally got our EIR approved in November of this year. So for us, and we have an appeal pending, so that's why we have something in the game here. We want to make sure that these appeals are processed expeditiously. And in order to do so, it's necessary to have some procedures in place. The last project approval from the Board of Harbor Commissioners of a major project was the TRAPAC project. And an appeal was filed of that project, and getting through the administrative appeal took, in my recollection, somewhere between 5 and 6 months. So these things can drag on. Our particular project is an important project for this region, but it's a very costly project. And the delay to date has already taken our project costs from $273 million to over $520 million. So every day of delay is very, very important to this particular project. It's also a very important project to you. the decision makers, because the LA EDC has estimated that there are 6,300 jobs involved with the construction of this project, and they've estimated that the tax revenue to the city of Los Angeles is $7.3 million. None of these things will happen until we actually get built. So I was going to read you a little portion about CEQA, that the purpose of CEQA is not to delay, but rather to process things expeditiously. But I would just like to say we support, and I have a few suggestions if you're interested in hearing them.
Thank you, Ms. Rubalcaba. If you have anything in writing, you can submit that for the record as well.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Okay. And after your card, we'll close public hearing, but please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman and members. Appreciate it. Tim McCosker, Mayor Brown Law Firm, here on behalf of Holy Cross. I agree with the CCA and with Sharon's comments. I just had a couple of questions and things to think about, and I might ask if you're going to hold this over to put in some written comments. On the 245 issue, I think it would make sense and it would be good for the community as a whole if we clarified this process and understood that if there is an appeal, if this ordinance is adopted, there will be an appeal, a CEQA appeal that comes to your body, and we shouldn't carve out essentially a second appeal or a different appeal under 245. I think the knowability and the speed and the accuracy of the development community and the community at large knowing what the process is, and we don't want to have this uncertainty about, is the community going to appeal under CEQA, or if it doesn't happen, is there going to be a 245 appeal? It just doesn't seem to serve any good purpose if we have multiple appeals that could come under different criteria. And then I would ask this as well. If the ordinance as drafted is adopted and the CEQA appeal can be granted by a simple majority of the council, will there also be, under existing bodies of law, a supermajority requirement, whether it's a 245 or if there's some other appeal that is filed with the city council? Because I think you want to clarify what is going to be the standard when you get up on appeal. I would also urge you to step back and think about the charter revision process that we went through a few years ago. The supermajority requirement for certain appeals was purposely placed into the charter, and I think there's a lot of benefit to the community where you have whether it's a harbor, airport, or DWP, or a planning commission where you have experts in that field with their staff working on a particular area of expertise, putting together their final determination when it comes to council. I mean, this was a political protection to provide that a supermajority will be required to overturn the decision below. So I'd ask you to carefully consider that and not throw out the supermajority without careful thought.
Thank you, Ms. McCosker.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Any questions from the staff, Councilmember?
Yes. So currently, well, let me just state that this is something that we should have done yesterday, and I fully support us doing this. The more clarity we have, not only in terms of CEQA, but in our entitlement procedures, it's better for everyone, and this is something that I think was missing and we should do. One question I have is when will the 10-day time to appeal start running? When do we start the clock on that, under the way the ordinance is currently written?
The way it's written right now would run 10 days from whenever the underlying body made its determination.
Okay. And so that's different from it starting to run from the filing of the notice required under the Public Resources Code?
Right. That notice starts the statute of limitations for a challenge.
Okay.
And that's usually to be filed within 5 days of the approval of the project.
Okay. And so why are we recommending it from the final determination?
So I guess in theory, the notice of determination would be filed within 5 days, but the notice of appeal wouldn't be filed within 10. The ordinance could be written in a way that it says, it could be written more expressly so that the underlying body's decision is not final for a period of 10 days. Mm-hmm. And then, or whatever the time to file an appeal would be, and then the notice of determination's time would run from that.
Okay.
That could be clarified, definitely.
Okay. Thank you. And this is one of those items where it doesn't compromise the environment or any type of review we need to do in order to make sure that all environmental proceedings are covered. This is something that makes sense. And I would just be interested to see how expeditiously we could approve this ordinance. I don't know what the next steps are. I know that the fee issue is still one that needs to be determined. Is that correct? And
Yes.
so we would need to send this back to the city
Right.
attorney?
Well,
Okay.
CAO
To the CAO.
as
Okay.
well, and working with the city attorney.
Or you could direct it to be adopted without the fee, or you could make that recommendation.
Okay.
It doesn't have to have a fee,
It doesn't have to have the fee.
but if you don't have a fee, then you're not recouping their costs.
Right.
So this is a policy determination.
Yeah.
Now, there are two other committees that I think has been referred to as well.
Okay.
So in terms of timing,
Okay.
So we still
have
have
to
to
deal
go
with the other
through,
committees.
so we still have to go through 2 more committees on this?
I believe it's been referred to two by the city clerk, yeah.
All right. Any other questions, Councilman?
I would just ask that we forward this expeditiously, and on the matter of the fee, I assume that by the time this gets to council, that's maybe worked out, and we'll have a recommendation there. I don't think we need to deal with that here, but
Right.
just ask that we move this expeditiously.
And should we just leave the fee blank as it is in the ordinance?
With
Leave
the
that as an
understanding
option.
that, with the recommendation, understanding that the CAO will look at this and come up with some recommendation.
Well, the instruction would be for the planning department and other impacted departments to work with the CAO to determine the appropriate filing fee before the ordinance is referred for council for consideration. So that way everyone is on the same page. The questions that were raised today, or the concerns that were raised today, they could be addressed as you go from one committee to the next. Would that be accurate, Madam Attorney?
Yes, although if ultimately you want a fee, you'd need that report.
Right,
So if you're going to direct the preparation of the report, have that submitted to council.
right.
Yeah.
So that'll be our action, so that we can get this out of here and just keep it going forward.
Okay?
So we'll be directing you to prepare the draft ordinance with the instructions of working with the CEO and any other appropriate department for the filing fee before the ordinance is referred to council.
Okay, so there are no other changes you want to make to the draft ordinance in terms of other...
Unless there are issues that were raised by our public comment that you feel need to be addressed and further hashed out. Otherwise, I don't see it.
Definitely, we can make the clarifying changes that have been made to clarify things, but substantively, we won't change it.
Right,
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
So then we just leave this committee.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. So that'll be the action of this committee. Next item, Roberto?
Item 3, Councilman, is a report from the Planning Commission. It's a draft ordinance, and it includes zone changes and height district changes and Q and D limitations for commercially zoned lots along Larchmont Boulevard and CD4.
Well, Renee, you know this is on consent, so if you still feel compelled to speak?
There is one opponent that filled out a card.
Okay, so let's go with the presentation, and then we'll go on with the public speaking.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Patricia Diefendorfer. I'm planning department staff assigned to this project. The item before you is a city-initiated zone and height district change from the QC2 1VL to the QC2 1D zone for properties along the west side and east side of Larchmont Boulevard between Beverly Boulevard and First Street. Beverly Boulevard to the north and First Street to the south. You can see on the map next to me here. The approval also includes, of course, the environmental clearance for the project, which is a negative declaration. The subject area, which is in the Wilshire Community Plan, is zoned and designated for commercial use. It is surrounded on all sides, as you can see from the map, by single-family residential uses, except to the north, which is also commercial. The zone change would add Q qualified conditions to the zone, which would impose design standards aimed at preserving the character and the scale of this one block area of Larchmont Boulevard, which is currently developed with neighborhood serving commercial uses and is a pedestrian friendly area. The conditions would require ground floor commercial uses, limit individual storefronts to 50 feet of linear street frontage, and impose other design regulations with which any new construction would have to comply. Some examples would be design guidelines for surface parking lots and parking structure design guidelines, as well as requirements for building articulation. The action also includes a height district change to the 1D height district, which would limit the height of new buildings to 35 feet from the 45 feet that's currently permitted. It also requires buildings to be set back 5 feet to honor a prevailing front yard setback that exists there currently. These conditions are in addition to existing Q conditions, which already apply to the subject properties and are would be retained through this action. On September 11th, the City Planning Commission approved the proposed zone and height district change and recommended that the City Council adopt the subject changes. The proposed zone change has had support from the community. There has, however, been one issue that's been raised by a property owner on Larchmont Boulevard. That issue is whether existing storefronts that are greater than 50 feet will be required to comply with the 50-foot limit on individual storefronts if there's a change of use on the site. Planning staff has consulted Building and Safety on this issue, and they have advised that the existing storefronts would not be required to comply with this requirement, even if there was a change of use, because they are legal non-conforming buildings. That's really the only outstanding issue. So that's a brief overview of this item, and staff would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
How long has this process been unfolding?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
How long has it been unfolding, this process? When did this start?
This was initiated by a motion that was adopted, I believe, in 2007, and we held the hearing on this in September of last year, and it's now coming to plumb. So it's been a couple of years in the making.
Relatively speaking.
Right.
Okay. So that being said, thank you.
Thank you.
We do have one speaker card, and that's Amy Saishen. Please come on up.
Council members, good afternoon. My name is Amy Saishen. I am an associate at Jeffrey Mangels Butler Marlboro. Our office is located at 1900 Avenue of the Stars in Los Angeles, 90067. I originally had prepared a 2-minute speech that was very succinct, but seeing as Councilmember Weiss is not here today, we are respectfully requesting that we continue this hearing until we have full quorum. The issue that Ms. Diefendorfer just spoke about, pertaining to the street frontage linear being greater than 50 feet, is what I'm here for. I'm here on behalf of Sims Properties, LLC, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could continue this hearing until we have a full 3 members of the Plum Committee.
I respect the fact that you're asking for a full committee. I can't tell you if he's going to be here next week. So I would rather just focus on a decision today and ask if you want to take advantage of the remaining 58 seconds.
Of the I see. All right. Well, first of all, Mr. Sims is absolutely supportive of preserving this village atmosphere, but the concern is with the proposed condition which requires buildings to be 50 feet along the linear frontage of Larchmont Village. He owns Rite Aid Pharmacy, which is about 91 feet right now, and he's concerned that to the extent a new tenant is moved in and to the extent they request for internal modifications, that would trigger building permit requirement and would trigger the requirement to have to potentially subdivide their property to fulfill this condition, and that would be absolutely unfair to our client.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. Just for the record, 2/3 of the committee does make a quorum.
Yes, but
okay.
I
So I just want to make sure that it's on the record.
I do understand that.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon.
Thank you.
Staff would like to respond to the assertions being made here.
Good afternoon, Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. This issue has come up repeatedly through all the different hearings, and again, we did research it. We did talk with Building and Safety. It is a legal non-conforming building. Any building that these regulations would apply to new construction. The objective is to have these regulations apply to new construction. If someone were to come in, if there were a change of use on this property and they needed a tenant improvement to improve for a new use, we would just sign off on it as the Q condition would not be applicable. So again, it's a legal non-conforming building and they would not be required to comply.
Okay. So it's grandfathered in to a degree.
It's grandfathered in.
All right. Any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair. It sounds like there's been a long process, hearings, a lot of community input, and the department has done what it has to get to this point, and I understand the local council office supports us moving forward, so I'd move that we move this item to council.
That'll be a second, so we can move on this item, and there'll be action of this committee. Thank you. Next item, Roberto?
Next item is item 4. It's a Planning Commission draft ordinance recommending the establishment of the Figueroa and Olympic Boulevard signage SUD.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Kevin Keller, City Planning. Before you today is the Signage Supplemental Use District, referred to as an SUD, for the area bounded by 9th Street, Flower, Olympic, and Figueroa in downtown Los Angeles. Quickly put, supplemental use districts permit and regulate signage in a specific geography of the city and allow regulations to be tailored to the unique character of entertainment districts such as this. It's important to note that this site is directly north of a currently adopted LA Sports and Entertainment District specific plan, which also permits dynamic and activated signage as part of its comprehensive streetscape and urban design program. This block falls within the LA Sports and Entertainment District streetscape plan. The development agreement also was covered as part of the EIR for that area, so it's firmly intertwined into the existing LA Sports and Entertainment District. The sign district before you includes 2 sub-districts. Sub-district A along Figueroa Street allows higher intensity signage. Sub-district B along Flower Street reflects the existing residential character on Flower Street and has more restrictions on the amount and intensity of signage. There are also 3 vertical sign zones dealing with both ground level signage, tenant signage, and high-rise signage. The site in front of you includes a variety of developments, both completed under construction and proposed. And these projects have been designed to integrate signage into them. I won't go into all the signage as part of this plan. It's all in front of your file there, but I will talk about one specific sign, the integrated electronic display. This sign will be comprised of LED elements embedded directly into the building skin itself, which will create images viewed from a distance. The Sitting Planning Commission and staff did thoroughly evaluate and rigorously condition this sign, and its recommended approval before you today was only arrived after significant reductions in the scope and scale of this sign. What originally was proposed to be the upper approximately 20 stories of a high-rise building has now been reduced to be no taller than 150 feet and has specific mitigation measures as to illumination, intensity, angle of viewing, and speed of movement. At this time, the CPC did approve this. This recommends approval of this before you. I believe there's a few remaining issues you're going to be hearing about. Many of them involve the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. The CPC, the Planning Commission, did approve an electronic display for the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising to showcase primarily student work and art pieces from this school. I believe there's a desire to permit full motion. Currently, the motion is limited in panning and scoping in that location through the environmental. The applicant has submitted some additional environmental regulation, and if it's the committee's indication to incorporate that, that should be referred to the city attorney, and we can comment on that through that process. Finally, I want to just note that the city planning staff has circulated a technical correction ordinance. It's in front of you today. Just minor technical corrections, nothing of substance, but we'd ask that you would include that in your motion or movement today. And the next step on this supplemental use district would be to refer to the city attorney for form and legality, and we're available for any questions.
Okay. I know you touched on this, but I want to make sure it's clear on the record that the level of intensity of the lighting and its impact in the surrounding property owners are such that there's like and character. They're an environment where the whole district is being designated because of the unique qualities of this type of signage that you'll find in other buildings that will be asserted as being compatible.
Correct. Yeah.
And there is no R1 zone across the street. There are no bedroom communities 2 blocks away.
No.
No.
But, I mean, any type of, the process the city's established for these districts, we do have to go through a very thorough public involvement. We had a public hearing for this action. We did receive some input from the neighborhood council that's affected. We also had some surrounding residents attend. And after mitigating these effects, we do have a number of mitigations for these on-site these signs located on this site, including mitigation measures involving intensity, daytime and nighttime illumination, etc.
The presence and existence of this sign district is a reflection of all those meetings you speak of, and because of its compatibility, we see it happening here. But I just want to amplify this. I'm being redundant here, but I want to make sure it's heard, that we, as a city, are not looking to move this type of a district and plop it into any neighborhood just because we want to.
Right.
It went through a process. How long has your process been in place?
The planning department process has been about 1.5 years, but there has been additional years just even before that process. It's a multi-year effort.
So you're looking at least 2 years of community input.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And I also want to clarify that the findings before you, our Planning Commission directed extensive findings specifically identifying why this location is appropriate and why, the next block to the north or east or west or other blocks are not appropriate. Again, these are very important findings to make as part of the proposal, and they're in front of you today.
I think the proof here is that every card that I've received is to support. I don't see one card against this. And that might mean good news for my fellow committee member. But do you have any other questions, sir? Okay.
Great.
I'm ready to move this. I've studied this. I've seen its impact. I know folks came here to speak, but if you're pretty much, it's all approvable.
I might be able to address one thing. I think all the community comment is going to speak about is there is one 430 square foot and electronic sign that was approved by the Planning Commission for the FIDM building. Currently, that sign will be restricted as to its movement and animation. I believe the main point in front of you today, in addition to the technical corrections, is whether the committee would like to modify mitigation measure 15 to permit unregulated movement in that sign. Again, I can give just 1 minute of background on that. The mitigation measure was developed mainly in light of the larger sign. You can imagine if you have a 20-story, what was proposed to be a 20-story, now it's 15 and under stories tall. A large format sign like that, it could be very disruptive, and we had that mitigation specially crafted for that large format sign. This sign is smaller than a typical billboard. It's directly embedded into the FIDM property. And that's something I just wanted to put out there, and that you might have some comments about that, or if that's something that maybe I don't know if the other council office would like to speak about, but we'd like to have some direction on that. I think that's what most of the people are speaking about.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Just in terms of its physical feature, it's 15 stories, correct?
No, correct. The 15-story integrated electronic display will have the motion controls. What the question is being raised by FIDM is regarding to only a secondary, smaller animated sign. It's 430 square feet, smaller than a billboard, about 25 feet tall. It's a little bit of a change from the mitigation measures here. We have reviewed the letter. We think that there are adequate findings in the letter that have been submitted. That being said, we would like to have that clarified before we send it on to the city attorney.
And that will be submitted to the city attorney.
If that's the direction of the committee, we can do that.
We want to make sure we have that clarity.
Okay, great.
I do want to offer Mr. Fisher from the district office an opportunity to come to the microphone. Otherwise, I think we're ready to act and move on this, since it seems like everyone's on the same page.
Good afternoon, committee members. Greg Fisher, Councilwoman Jan Perry's office. Our only concern with the sign issue that Mr. Keller has just raised is that whatever building or buildings that sign faces in the future not be burdened with an undue amount of light or motion that would interrupt people's work and or live habits. I understand the way the digital signs are done today, that those light bulbs, those LEDs can be directed toward the street, and as far as I'm concerned, that may be the mitigation we need, so that if the committee is willing to consider that as a mitigation, I think the council office would be very pleased with it.
So here we have a sign that's going to be 15 levels high. It's going to cast a similar amount of light across the street. The assumption here is that in this sign district, the building across the street will also have the potential of having a lighted billboard.
There is the possibility in the future, although I don't believe it's included. No.
It's not included?
No, this is a specific block, and across the street would have to apply for its own sign district in order to be able to do that.
Okay. Why don't we do this? If we can have the staff give you the type of language that is necessary to satisfy your concerns before council.
Mr. Keller apparently has an idea already.
Okay. Okay.
I'd like to, Kevin Keller, City Planning, I'd like to introduce ideas if possible. The FITM folks have submitted a graphic of the sign just in case you'd like to see it. But what we can do is the ordinance does require a special follow-up project permit for that sign at the time it is actually installed. As you know, this building is not under construction yet. What we can do is we can add a condition clarifying that when this sign comes before us, we notify the surrounding property owners, and any kind of additional lighting and glare issues are analyzed at that time, if that's something that would provide a little bit more action. Again, this building is not yet constructed, and that would sort of when and if and when, I mean, it would be approved, but if and when that project comes before us, we would have a project permit process for that sign, including notification of the adjacent property owners and given it a time to comment on that, if that works. So it'd be a number of years.
You're comfortable with that?
Council office is fine with that.
Okay. So, given the additional conditions that were just verbalized, along with the technical changes that have been submitted, I believe we're ready to move this item. So that'll be the action of this committee. Thank you very much, and I want to thank, and then just to read for the record, the people that were here, to verify to your bosses that you actually came to this committee.
So, Councilman, just for the record, you will approve the establishment of the SED, and you'll refer to the city attorney, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So, Mr. Fisher, thank you for being here. We had Shane Parker.
With modifications.
With modifications. For Chris Ray Joseph, we had Craig Lawson, we had Amy Forbes, we had Paul Rohrer, John Whitaker, Tim Bolton, and Veronica Perez-Becker. Thank you for being here. So we're all in support and hopefully economize your time as well. Thank you very much. Our next item, Roberto?
The next item is item 5, Councilman. It's an appeal by Maurice Majid. He's the applicant and the appellant. He's appealing the decision of the West LA APC, which denied various entitlements to add 3 dwelling units to an existing 2-unit apartment building in CD 11.
Good afternoon, Honorable Council Members. Linda Smith, City Planning. The item before you is an appeal of the West Los Angeles Area Planning Commission's December 3rd, 2008 decision to deny the applicant's request for specific plan exceptions to the Venice Coastal specific plan. Among the requests for exceptions primarily was a exception request to allow a guest parking spot to be located within the required setback area. This setback area is actually located immediately adjacent to an environmentally protected and local historic resource known as the Bologna Lagoon. Also, there were exception requests denied to allow reduced parking on the site. There were denials of the other associated entitlement requests, which basically were a coastal development permit, a project permit compliance with the specific plan, a Mellow Act compliance, and lastly, a denial without prejudice of an adjustment request to allow parking within the required front yard. These requests were all in conjunction with a proposed project that basically was the conversion of an existing apartment, 2-unit apartment dwelling that contained 3 guest rooms. Those guest rooms were going to have kitchens added to them, ultimately giving us a 5-unit dwelling unit within, I should say on a lot that contains a zone for single-family development. Basically means the two units with the 3 guest units was a grandfathered use. It already existed on the site. The applicant wanted to convert those 3 guest rooms to full units and was not able to provide the on-site parking as required by the specific plan. The West Los Angeles Area Planning Commission denial was based on, as I just indicated, the project existing density, which was already greater than allowed by the zone, and therefore conversion leading to an even greater density on the site. The denial was also based on the project's immediate location to the Bologna Lagoon area, the environmentally sensitive Laguna area, and also was based on asking for a reduction in parking. The specific plan parking in the Venice area is greater than the code for obvious reasons because we are in a parking impacted area. So lastly, staff would ask that you uphold the denial of the West Los Angeles Area Planning Commission's decision, and if you have any questions, I'll go ahead and answer those now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have the appellant, I believe it's Maury Majid.
Councilman, the Representative Constantine Zanzis, if he could defer his time to me.
Look, you have...
I need 2 minutes.
Well, as an appellant, you can speak your piece.
Anyway, okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, council people. My name is Morris McGidd. I'm at 1054 Selby Avenue, Los Angeles. And I've had the building for 14 years. The building was built in 1971. And the previous owner, who had it since 1979, had the same configuration with these guest rooms as I inherited, and they were converted with kitchens and full kitchens. The tenants have been there long term and have enjoyed the privileges with these kitchens. I spoke with my tenants, there's 3 of them, and they said at this time if it was an adverse ruling with respect to these units, they would be vacating them. Because it would create a problem for them. They have depended on those kitchens to go ahead and help them out in these times to make it easier for them to get by on their limited incomes. It would create an economic problem for me because I'd end up with a 60% vacancy factor. I've had an apartment in the past that took me 6 months to go ahead and rent. These are very difficult times. This is a major part of my income, and I would appreciate your consideration in this matter.
Thank you, sir.
So very much. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we have Constantine. Come on up.
Yeah, good afternoon. Constantine Zanzis, 333 Washington Boulevard, number 146, Marina Del Rey. I just want to clarify, this is an existing building. It was built in 71. There's 5 dwelling units on it. 2 are legal units, 3 are guest rooms. The guest rooms are, by definition, don't have kitchens. So we're not asking for anything other than putting the kitchens in. The number of habitable spaces stays the same. The number of parking, we're not appealing the front yard setback parking spot. As we requested that, we're not going to appeal that. We're only asking to put the kitchens into 3 guest rooms. The problem, well, it wasn't clear from the APCW decision whether or not they're rejecting this on the parking issue or on the zoning issue. As again, the Venice Pacific plan came in around 1989. The building was built 18 years before that. The density of the dwelling units for the parking issue is the same as almost all buildings built around that period. 1 bedroom, 1 parking unit. I gave 5 examples of these in my findings that I presented to the APCW. And since then, I've been able to find one other case in Venice at 50 Breeze Avenue where the APCW approved the addition of 2 dwelling units to 12 existing dwelling units on a similar sized lot, and there are no parking for this building whatsoever. And as you know, there are plenty of other examples of this, but they're really difficult to find. I know of one other example where the APCW has approved the addition of units or change of units from guest rooms to legal units with the addition of kitchens in them. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that legally you can put in a wet bar into these guest rooms, which would include a sink, 10 square feet of counter space, fridge up to 50 cubic feet, and you almost have a kitchen anyway in those units. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Our next on our cards is Clyde Williams. Are you still here? Never returned. Okay. Chalice McPherson.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Shally McPherson. I live at 738 Howard Street in Venice. I have a certificate of disclaimer in, although I do serve on the Venice Neighborhood Council, I am testifying as a stakeholder and not as the Venice Neighborhood Council because we have not issued a recommendation on this. I made a site visit. I looked at the documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, this plot is zoned for one single-family residence. It has 2 with 3 guest rooms. There's inadequate parking. It's right by the Bologna Lagoon. They would put a parking lot within 25 feet of this estuary, which is illegal. I uphold personally the zoning administrator, Ms. Smith's hearing on this. I uphold the APC's issuing of a denial. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions for the staff, Councilmember? Okay. I would move to deny the appeal based on all the physical characteristics, the geographic issues, and the sensitivity issues with the local environment, especially the Laguna, and just based on the limitations of space. So that would be the action of this committee if there's a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, that concludes item number 5. We already covered our last item. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
There was a public comment card submitted. Is it still there?
Let's see. It's the same person that never responds, Clyde Williams.
Just checking.
Okay. We are truly adjourned. Thank you very much.